Welcome back to the Innovative Agency, everybody. Hello, hello. It's Sharon Torek again with you. We've been having a lot of really great conversations about agency business development lately on the podcast. And one thing we've never really talked about with any, or focused on really, is how a good case study fits into not only your clients' marketing efforts, but your own business development efforts as an agency owner and leader. And so today's conversation is going to be right on point there. And I'm really looking forward to digging into this whole issue of how you do case studies better, smarter, how you integrate them well. And we're also going to talk about with today's guest, who is Joel Klettke, who is the co-founder of Case Study Buddy, My Case Study. I'm going to flub it. I'm sorry. You're going to introduce yourself, and so we're going to get the company name correct, and so people will be able to find you. But Joel, thank you for being here today. I don't usually flub my intro like that, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Joel,
that's all right. I think you stuck the landing, but yeah, I'm Joel. I'm the co-founder of Case Study Buddy. You've got it. And we're a specialist, agency at this point that really works with clients on that end to end. How do you get these? How do you leverage them? And so I'm really excited to share some of the things we've learned over the past 6-7 years of just having such a narrow and intentional focus there.
Right. I guess where I'll start is, what do you think? We were talking briefly before we started this episode, and you sort of shared a little of your backstory about why you felt like this was a need that had to be filled. What do you think makes doing case studies as a part of a regular business development effort so challenging for agency, or what do you think makes them so challenging for agencies to regularly do for their clients? What's sort of the low-hanging fruit there in terms of challenge?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things. I think fundamentally, most companies, agencies and otherwise, they have no process. They have no system in place. For most, it's a reactive function. A customer is happy, or someone in the company goes, oh, we should really get some case studies. And then everyone rushes to sort of figure things out in reverse. Okay, who might be a good fit? And, oh, what is their story in the first place? And who might be good to talk about it? And so there's no underlying systems in most businesses for surfacing these, making the ask, identifying opportunities. I think that's problem number one. I think number two, there's really not a lot of ownership within many companies, depending on the size and structure of the org. Sometimes this falls to marketing. Other times this falls to individual sales reps or individual account managers to be tabling these. And without a clear sort of roadmap for who owns what piece of this and how do they interact on the whole with the rest of the team to make this possible, it becomes very difficult. I think a third thing is just constraints from the customer side. You will always be asking someone to do you a favor when you ask for a customer story or customer success story. And so sometimes there's constraints, whether it's the clients aren't comfortable or it's not positioned in a way that makes them comfortable. Sometimes there's just the challenges with buy-in, making them feel like this is something safe and beneficial and easy to take part in. And so that can certainly trip things up. And then honestly, at the end of the day, I think it's not a sexy excuse, but for a lot of people, they're just too busy. When you are so focused on serving clients, when you're so focused on selling or whatever else it might be, sometimes it's hard to push pause. And unless you make these a priority, unless you keep them top of mind, it can become difficult because you need a certain velocity to get these done and get them done well. You need to be able to move fast. And when there's lots competing for your attention, that can be very tough. So I think there are a lot of different reasons, but a lack of systems and a lack of accountability, I think, are the two really the biggest ones.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And it can seem like an overwhelming start to finish sort of project, if you think of it, if you don't think of it in stages or steps, I suppose. So I definitely want to get to that and how you start thinking of this from a process perspective. But I want to pull a thread of what you just said with respect to agencies and their clients and getting their client buy-in. I guess I'd love to start there because I have an experience that one of our agents, my firm's agencies, went through, and we had to actually help them navigate it, even from a legal perspective, which is never, a great thing when you're working with a client already. They did a case study and they didn't go through the channels to get the right buy-in. And the case study, cast the client in a great light. Otherwise the agency wouldn't have published it. But the client was not happy about being a part of a case study. And so that's an extreme example and a rare example, I think, of what can happen. But talk a little bit about the whole process as an agency of priming your clients to get buy-in from them, or even going through the channels of getting buy-in and explaining why this is a good thing for all of you to do.
Yeah. And that is really challenging because at the end of the day, the best customer stories have the customer at the center. It doesn't benefit anybody to really go rogue and publish whatever. There's always that risk of a compromised relationship or losing even the detail and the richness that comes with having a customer in the middle. So, well, how do we get there? What keeps this from happening? I think there are three things when you hear no from a client. What does it actually mean? I think one is fear. How are we going to be represented? Fear of that. What is going to be shared? Fear of that. I think so much comes down to how the ask is framed. And one of the key things when it comes to improving your odds of getting buy-in is specificity. Why them? Why are you asking them specifically? What is it about their story that you're hoping to talk about? We've seen a marked improvement in asks where you mention something specific about the engagement, that is why you're choosing them, some specific part of how you work together that you want to cover. It helps them feel like, okay, there's some control there. And then in terms of fear of what's exposed, there should always be the case. Again, this is boilerplate for us, but it makes a huge difference. Making sure they know that they have control in the process, that they have veto power, that they have the ability to review a draft before anything goes live and say, we'd love for this to be changed, or we'd love for this to be altered, or maybe don't share that or actually include this. We've seen that go both ways. So one of them is fear. The other is inconvenience. So how long is this going to take me? And the way you can combat that is with process. If you have built out a well-defined process, if you know the steps you're going to go through, if you can put a timeline to it and rightfully come back to your client and say, this is going to take no more than half hour to an hour of your time, or hour and a half of your time, all in, including the interview, that creates this comfort of, okay, I know what I'm getting into. We have to remember that just as you are busy, your clients are busy, and you're also asking them in some cases to flex some capital internally for you. They might need to go get approval from others, or they might need to go get buy-in. And so you want to make sure that they're primed to know that that effort is going to be worth it, that that time is going to be respected. And then the third thing is kind of the question of, what's in this for me? So there's fear of what's going to be revealed. There's inconvenience. But the last is, greed, for a lack of a better way of putting it. It's not really greedy, though. They want to know what's in it for them. And I think there's lots of ways to couch that benefit. Sometimes it can be, well, we've got a really great audience. We're going to put you in a great light. We're going to share it to this number of people. You can tout sort of your plan for the story, how it will be promoted, make sure that they know we want to put you in the spotlight, and highlight the great work or the great things that you are doing. Other times you can look at things like incentives. That's a different kind of ballgame, because if you incentivize, you do have to disclose. In many cases, you can't just pay them a bunch of money to say whatever you want them to, and then publish a story. So you can bring incentives into it. Other times there are ways to make it mutually beneficial, whether it's through kind of a joint webinar or finding some way of promoting the two of you at the same time, but finding an answer to the question of, where is the payoff in this for us? Is it monetary? Is it some other benefit? Is it just the notion of knowing you've done a good thing? And honestly, at its simplest, one of the things we've seen make a difference is just mentioning what your goal in publishing this is. Why them? What specific part of their story? What are you hoping they'll be able to cover? How is this going to be used? And then the secret sauce, I guess, to getting buy-in that we've also encountered is if you can send a really great sample, well-designed, demonstrates the end product, shows them that other people have taken part in this and it wasn't that scary, that can make a big difference too, because it makes everything I just talked about tangible. So that's some of how you can come at that.
And then this is great. Do you typically, or I guess typically is a strong word, do you regularly recommend that the agency agree to share the output of the case study with the client so that the client can share in the distribution of it, whether it's at trade events or whether it's at peer conferences, or is there some sort of agreement typically or understanding before the process starts that the client could use the content for their benefit as well?
Yeah, it's not normally like a structured legal document or anything like that, but we view it as
Right.
it's something to celebrate. It's something to, we want to make sure, and so much comes down to how you word the ask as well. We have to remember being asked to be in a case study is terrifying. Being asked to be featured, not so much. They may have the same end product, but even the wording that you use. So I think an invitation to be part of a story that showcases them well, an invitation to be part of crafting that narrative and have a say in what is said and how, and then to be part of the launch of that and to say, we're going to make it look really great. We're going to make it sound really great. We're going to promote it. And if you see fit, if you're proud of it too, and we're going to work hard to make sure you're proud of it, then sure, go, we would love for you to share it internally, externally. Some of the biggest benefits can come from them just running it up the flagpole within their own office.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's always that open invitation. You want this to be something that doesn't just make you look great, but something that makes them, the individual who took part and the company, look great, feel great, have something worth celebrating. So we treat launches of stories like a celebration, like, hey, we all made it. We all built this thing together.
Mhm. And this is going to sound like a silly question, but I assume a case study by definition always only includes the example of one client or one company, one brand.
It depends. Normally, that's very, very normally going to be the case. There are some situations that you might see something different. For example, partner stories. You might have yourselves and a partner, and you're jointly reflecting the impact that you had together with that client. That can be a really great avenue for cross promotion, and especially if you have partners that are larger or have even bigger audiences than your agencies. Some of the tool stack you use or things like that, they may be interested. And so you can tell those types of stories. And often that might be a sweetener to get more people engaged because they know, oh, hey, this is with our agency, but it's also with this tool. And they've got quite the platform. It's not uncommon, not common, but not rare to have case studies that are sort of industry level. But normally that's only done after the individual ones are complete, and then you're kind of doing this aggregate sort of impact story. So one-to-one is the best way, in my view, of coming at it, or this partner kind of story approach, because it lets you go deep and really address the concerns of an individual and showcase one story, and then you can always build on that into these other things.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about how to set the client's expectations or have the client conversation about getting their buy-in to do a case study. Let's talk a little bit now. Let's shift towards process inside the agency. You alluded to earlier, and I can totally understand this. The biggest drag on this is probably the agency's perception that it doesn't have a bandwidth to do this regularly or to do a quality job on it because of lack of resources, et cetera. So where's the low-hanging fruit here in terms of how you start to put process in place so that you are more inclined and more prepared to suggest a case study and to go through the case study completion process as an agency?
Yeah, I think before we ever get customers involved, there's some very simple but rare things that you can stand up that can make this easier. We've seen a huge difference in organizations of all sizes, enterprise right down to small business, in having a centralized SOP, a document that outlines some core things like, what does an ideal candidate even look like? What coverage gaps are we looking for as a team? By coverage gap, I mean, what types of stories do you want to be able to tell? Are you trying to tell stories about, for example, agency switchers, people who left a different agency to come to yours? That might be one type of story. Are you looking for stories about a particular facet of your offering or a particular trait or value that you have? Defining that can be very, very helpful in getting that internal alignment and helping everyone internally move with intention. Things like standing up some templates on how the ask is made or positioned that allows you to democratize that amongst the team, set consistent expectations. And then incremental feedback is really, really key. A lot of people miss this one and they just swing for the fences and go for the case study right away when they know there's been a win. But one of the things that we see make a big difference is kind of ongoing feedback, more than just NPS scores, more than just CSAT or things like that. But are you making the most of the regular cadence of comms you already have with customers? Do you make talking about ROI and KPIs a normal and expected thing? Do you check in and see how things are progressing? So mapping those things out lays a fantastic foundation and makes it easier to spot a win when it happens. And then also in that SOP, routing and approval so people know what to do with it when it shows up. But when it comes to the actual production, I think the key to think of and the best thing to keep in mind is let everyone stay in their lane and move together. Not that it has to be this way, but for example, the way that we're set up is to have a project manager assigned whose job it is to oversee everything from coordinating that interview all the way through to final completion. That needs to be somebody's defined role, because the most challenging part of a story isn't necessarily the creation, it's the follow-up and the admin and staying on top of it. And someone has to own and have the bandwidth for that and be empowered to do that. I think for us, one of the key things is having really great briefing internally so that you know before you get on that call, what is the story we are looking for? Not the same generic question set every time, ask the same 10 things, you'll get the same 10 stories. But having a really great brief can kind of galvanize teams to go, okay, we know this is the story we're going in for. We know we're going for these types of details. It can make those interviews run more smoothly and moreover, make the creation process happen faster because we're all aligned now on what the output of this should be, what the story ought to be, what the angle we're keying into is. When you have those factors in place and you've got someone whose job it is to oversee kind of follow-ups, approvals, rally, I want to say rally the cats, but I mean herd the cats. Now you've got a bit of a stronger system in place to make sure that this doesn't drop off the face of the earth. One of the key ingredients, no matter your organization size, I mentioned this earlier, is velocity, how fast you can move from interview to draft or interview to video. And if I was going to leave one thought in the mind of folks listening, it's optimize that time, get that time down as quickly as you can, whether that means taking out approvers, empowering one person to know enough to make the call to say, we are happy with this, we're satisfied with this, we're taking it back to the customer. But the faster you can move from interview to production, the more likely that story sees the light of day. We've seen that play out hundreds of times. So, I would focus on the underlying foundation and then speed to delivery. And if you get those two things right, the rest tends to kind of figure itself out.
Well, and if you've got the right people in place here, this sounds like an agency's dream because it's a very journalistic approach. This part of it sounds very journalistic to me, where you're getting to the bottom of the story, you're getting the story turned around accurately, and the message correctly, cast with your choice of words, etc., but on a deadline and with velocity, like you point out. So a lot of agency people miss journalism and miss taking a journalistic approach to the work that they do for their clients. And so this is a good way to sort of, I guess, scratch that itch while also making sure that you don't let the work drag down and therefore things fall through cracks. I also love the idea of one person being on point from start to end, because you can definitely see how it would be too easy for this to get to the bottom of to-do lists when there's a committee approach to getting the project moved along, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing it empowers is oftentimes someone, we operate in silos without knowing it. The person closest to the account might not be the person tasked with creating the piece. And you need that person in their context and their backstory. You need a way of getting that out of them and getting it out of them quickly and moving ahead. And so, as you mentioned, having someone run point just means that they can make sure the right things happen in the order they need to happen, so that we're consistently telling the story. And so much of optimizing this process is avoiding, we have to go back and revise, or, the client's not happy with the narrative. Well, if you've already seeded that early on, the odds of that happening go down, go down, go down. So, so much is just about empowering teams and people and individuals to be proactive because they have the story, they have the formats, they know what they're driving for.
You mentioned project management and having a dedicated project manager. Do you have a point of view at who at the agency should be running point with the client for their part in all of this, making certain that they're comfortable with their participation in the process, making sure that they're comfortable with the end product before it gets distributed and circulated? I'd love to hear your thoughts about who that person or who those people should be in the agency.
Yeah, it's difficult because in other companies it's more explicit, right? There's someone in product marketing or there's someone in customer marketing, and you see that kind of hierarchy really commonly. And so even though it touches many teams, it's more obvious in those circumstances who is running point. Within
Mhm.
the agency, it gets a little bit more complicated depending on the stage that you're at. When you're very, very early, for example, it might make sense to have the founder be the one making the ask, or if they're quite close to the relationship and they've been part of it, it might make sense for them to be making the ask, but that will quickly derail if they're also responsible for now managing the project through because they've got an agency to run. And that's a danger that happens in small companies is, for example, the founder wants to be really involved in all components, and then they're too involved and then it gets stuck in the gunk and falls off. So I think for agencies, I wish I had a really definitive answer, but I think it's about looking internally and answering a couple questions. Number one, who has the most context? If the person with the most context also has the bandwidth to sort of carry the project through, they should be on point. If they do not, then you can look at, okay, could we task this to the creator? So if you have, for example, like the person who might be running the interview or the writer, they might be the same person, might be different, but you might task the project management of it to the creator in a smaller agency. So it might be that they are sourcing information internally, running that with the client, then treating it like a creative project just with multiple stakeholders that they report into. So that's not all that uncommon. And then if you're a little bit larger, if you have someone who is internally owning your marketing for the firm, then it's much easier. They should be the one running point, herding the cats, flowing through. So it really depends on the size and stage that you're at. But the honest conversation just has to be who's got the context, who's got the bandwidth, who is going to be able to make this a priority. And I think when you answer those questions, honestly, it becomes easier to decide, should it really be the founder? Should it really be the creator? If we're tasking them with 30 other blog posts to put out this month, things like that. So it's more of a conversation depending on where you're at on that spectrum.
Yeah, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. All right, so we talked about the client buy-in conversations. We talked about process. I'd love to get your thoughts on leverage here, how the agency leverages case studies. What are some of the best maybe success stories you've seen about how an agency, because you could create these beautiful studies, and if you don't leverage them properly for the benefit of the client, if that's the goal, or the agency, it's just a lot of wasted effort, and nobody can afford that. And if you're already strapped for bandwidth as an agency in your business development efforts, you certainly can't afford it. So what are your thoughts on how the agencies can best leverage what the best, I know there's tons of opportunities, but what are some of your ideas about the best opportunities that agencies can use to take advantage of this tool?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the status quo, which is the worst. And then by contrast, we'll see. The worst thing you can do is celebrate publishing, push it to a resources or portfolio section on your site and go, we did it, guys. Amazing work. And that's what most people do because it is a small victory just to get these live. Right. I think one of the most important things agencies or any company can do, but agencies especially because they have the skill set to do this, is proactively plan from the moment of capture where you want this to live and how you want to leverage it, because then you can capture with intention. It's very, very hard to get a video testimonial out of an interview that didn't have a video testimonial. It's possible, but that's what we mean, being proactive from start to finish. So some of the ways we see these being leveraged in really creative ways for agencies, for services. One of the ones that I really love, when you don't need a huge client base, this will be adjusted based on how many clients in a year you serve, but you can have either a quarterly or bi-monthly or monthly sort of social feature where it's like, we want to highlight this great campaign. And it might even go as far as this amazing person within this company who helped make this campaign possible. And we've seen this in software as well, like Revenate is a great example of this. They have ongoing features where it's putting a customer in the spotlight and saying, look at this amazing campaign they did or amazing outcome they've had, and they make it regular. And what I love about that is not only does this normalize, it creates the expectation for people watching your agency that You're going to be publishing about results, talking about KPIs. It does that for leads and prospects. It does it for your clients too. They're able to now see this is a regular, normal, and expected thing. One of the things that can make an enormous difference for agencies, especially as we enter uncertain economic conditions, where the goal now has to be get more clients and retain the ones you have. Well, on the get more client side, cold outreach. There's a study done by a company called HipLead, who's since been acquired. It was done a few years back, but they saw that the number of positive responses to cold outreach did something like doubled or tripled when you shared a logo or a well-known kind of client in that space in that outreach. And so including, whether it's a soundbite, whether it's a link off to some sort of concise one sheet, leveraging them in your cold outreach is huge, especially when you think carefully about, am I aligning this based on industry? Am I aligning this based on the type of role I'm reaching out to? Am I aligning this based on the type of outcome or whatever it might be? So cold outreach for agencies, it can be particularly powerful to leverage these there. When it comes to retention or when it comes to upselling, if you have a customer on the fence about, is this avenue right for us? Is this service offering right for us? Should we renew? This is a great opportunity to bring stories of clients who did leverage that aspect of your services or did choose to renew or go to a different tier plan or whatever it might be based on your relationship and how you're structured. But this retention upselling piece gets missed a lot because people go, oh, we used it to close the customer, we're done. But you have a huge opportunity to continue to share these stories. In fact, one of the ways you can do this subtly where it doesn't feel like selling or pressure at all is if you have a newsletter that goes out to clients, include a customer story in there, share some of the other things happening within your customer base, the positive results, and use that to say, if you've been considering making an investment into this area or launching a campaign like this, we'd love to talk about it. So those are some of the ones that we've seen agencies and services companies leverage quite a bit. But the other thing, just to go back to what I said earlier, when you publish with intention, the framework, really simple to remember: nibble, bite, snack, meal. What's the smallest piece of content you can create? That might be a single pull quote that goes onto a landing page. What's kind of a bite-sized thing, whether it's an audiogram, take the audio from the interview. Now you've got something that plays nicely in ads or on social. A snack might be a one sheet or a high-level overview for someone who wants more than just a quick soundbite, but they're not quite ready for a deep dive. And then the meal might be the deep dive story where you're really laying out the methodology and all those different things. But plan from the outset. Do we have a nibble, a bite, a snack, and a meal? And that's a very simple way of thinking about how can we leverage this across media and channels.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you laid that out, because one of my questions was going to be, one of your best leverage points is the fact that this content, some of it's evergreen, some of it not so much, but you can chop it up in a million different ways to make it more evergreen, right? Depending upon how you're doing it and what you're focusing on. And that's just as valuable. I mean, I can see the value of that as much as I can see the value of the relationship cementing of the whole process of including your client in a case study, if you've done it well and if they're happy to be asked and all that kind of stuff. So I think leverage is important to think about as an agency, because if you can't think strategically about maybe the leverage or the benefits, you're probably less likely to invest in creating the process that makes this easier for you to do in the first place, I'm guessing. I wonder if that's your experience too, working with agencies. Yeah.
It can be really galvanizing for the whole team to see what is going to come out of this conversation. Out of this one conversation, we are going to have fuel for our ad campaigns, for our cold outreach campaigns. We're going to have fuel for our landing pages. We're going to have core assets that can show off our work on our site. We're going to have, whether it's slide decks that we can speak through on calls or things we can submit to awards. We see, especially overseas, for some reason, awards programs are really popular in Europe and the UK and so on, and agencies will leverage these to get into those. So when you can lay out as a team, this is the utility we see here. This is the opportunity. This is the totality of what we can do. And then engineer your capture towards that, right? If you want to have video, make sure you're asking permission for video. If you want to have stories that talk about this facet, make sure you're engineering towards that. But that really lights people up, that gets them excited. And especially because these are such a team sport where you're often reliant on an account manager to nominate a client or identify, and then someone to create it, and then someone else to promote it. having everyone on that same page can give this a sense of purpose and make it feel bigger than just, oh, it's one more content asset going into the resources section and off we go.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really fast but super helpful tour, just in thinking about, how you handle the communications with a potential target or subject of a case study, what you need to do internally and think about, and then what the benefits are to you and how you need to be strategic about that, kind of at the high level before you engage in the tactics. And so, Joe, I want to thank you for walking us through this at a quick pace, but also I think you were really, really descriptive in some of the things that agencies need to be thinking about. And it was a very handy checklist of stuff that you can take back to an agency of any size to see how this opportunity fits into your business development strategy. I know that Case Study Buddy doesn't typically white label for agencies, but I assume you do collaborate with agencies on these types of projects. And so I'd love for agencies listening to hear how they might get in touch with you or learn more about what your company does.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, whether you're trying to level up your own programs or peek into our insights, we publish a lot on the blog about things that we're learning and doing and trying. And so casestudybuddy.com/blog, there will be something there that you can take away and go even deeper into the weeds, the tactics, the things we didn't have time to talk about today, whether it's checklists or specific things. So I would encourage you to check that out, even just to shape your own understanding and programs. Casestudybuddy.com has lots of resources on everything from pricing to the typical, types of formats that we can put together. We love collaborating with agencies and having discussions. We do stories for agencies themselves. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. I'm constantly trying to share new things I'm learning or things that we're seeing make a difference, or trying to help shift the mindset of largely everybody in B2B spaces from these are not an asset, they're a program. It's not a one-off, it's a system. And I try to be prescriptive there. So don't always answer quickly, but I do always answer if you pop a message over. Always happy and excited to jam on this stuff.
Yeah, well, I spent a little bit of time on the site and it's very content rich. There's a lot of really good, both high level and also really tactical, practical content there about how to integrate case studies into your business development strategy as an agency. And I think through osmosis, you learn how to do this better for your clients if you do it for yourself as an agency, right? So, and I want to thank you for being so generous with the information today, because I think it's a topic we don't spend much time talking about in terms of how it integrates into the agency's business development sort of toolkit. And you gave us a great primer and answered a lot of hard questions. And so I really appreciate you being with us today. So thank you, Joel.
Yeah, thanks for having me so much. And hey, for an agency, they can steal your branding, they can, they can steal your people, but no one will ever be able to take away the successes you've earned for your clients. And I think that in and of itself makes these such an incredible biz dev asset. And that's why I'm so passionate and excited about helping people really tap into that. And I'm really excited to see what agencies will do with some of what they learned and where they go with it.
Yeah, well, who better to tell your story or your client's story than you? I totally agree, than you and your agency. So very well said. Joel Klettke, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it and all the insights. And thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you found this as insightful as I did, and I look forward to seeing you on our next episode coming up soon. Be well until then. Thanks. Bye.